Hi guys, as I said in the last episode, this will be a review of the whole challenge. For those who don't know, I attempted to pay my rent only by playing 16NL Zoom on PokerStars with a profit target of $200 in a time span of 10 days of poker. This video will cover some big wins, big losses, spews, and some nice non-showdown hands that I took down. You will find the timestamps for each of them in the video description. Let's get going. Okay, so first hand we'll talk about is 7-8 of diamonds in the button. I make a standard open and get called by the big blind. I flop an open-ended straight draw with a backdoor flush draw, opponent checks. And I fire a standard c-bet, opponent calls, turn is a jack, he checks, and I decide to take the free card, which is a good one for me because it makes my hand the nuts. My opponent fires an overbet. So I figured one of two things may be happening here. Either he's bluffing and I won't be taking any extra cent from him, or he rivered some kind of 2-pair or set and he will pay me off big time. And I decide to fire an overbet and my opponent calls and builds up a huge pot. He ended up having ace-9 of spades. In the next hand I have ace-jack of diamonds, again on the button, under the gun opens, I defend, and we have a 3-bet squeeze from the small blind, and we get an extra color from the big blind. The initial raiser folds and I decide to call here as well with my hand in position. The pot was getting very big. This guy has close to 2-to-1 stack to pot ratio, even on the flop. The initial raiser checks, and the guy with the shortest stack in the hand decides to bet out half pot. So this is the moment when I thought that if you were a short stack, I think you would have just checked here, maybe induce a check raise. I didn't think he had that strong of a hand, and also the aggressor, the preflop aggressor, just checked. So I decided to make the speculative call here. If this guy were to overbet, shove, or to re-raise, to shove, or anything close to that, I would have just folded. So even if we think like that, my call here really looks like a trap for the deep stack player to my left. Again, as I said, if he were to shove, I would have folded. Equity wise here, I block aces, ace king, jacks, and have decent equity against queens, random king, given the size of the pot. So this guy just folds, and let's see the turn. So I get a flush draw, and my opponent here just checks with the stack to pot ratio under 1-to-1. So I figured if he had the king, aces, queens, he would have shoved here on the double flush draw turn. So I decide just to check back and induce a bluff from him on the river. At this point I think his range consists of under pairs to the board, maybe a weak king, or drawing hands like spades or open-ended straight draws or gut shots. The river is a very good card for me, makes my life easy, but I would have called an eventual jam without this jack coming. So if he had a lone king, he would have jammed the turn or a check here to get the showdown. He instead jams now. This looks like a desperate steal attempt, and I snap call him, of course, and he shows down ace queen of spades for a missed flush draw and a missed gut shot. Next hand, sevens in the button again. Limp from under the gun. I decide to make the pot a bit bigger in case I flop a set, which I do, and my opponent fires a small bet on this flop. I decide to make the pot bigger now, given that this flop kind of hits his opening ranges. I mean, he may have ace queen, may even call me down with ace king here. Lots of good hands that I beat that he can call me with. Now this the situation tends to get a bit tricky on the turn because he fires again, and I decide to put him to the test. We are both very deep here, and he decides only to call. So I think that he would have been more aggressive here if he had something like king 10, king queen. Yeah, he would have called maybe with a made straight, with a Broadway straight, but what can I do? It would have been just a cooler. He just calls me, and the river brings the second king. The flush draw missed, and he decides to fire again, ridiculously small. And right here I decided that I went with my initial read on the turn, that if he had king 10, king queen, or some made hand, leaving aside the Broadway straight, he would have re-raised on the river. And given that we are both deep here, I decided to go for max value with my full house, and he ended up calling and showing trip kings with the ace king offsuit. The final hand, I have 7-5 offsuit in the big blind, cut off limps. I decided to see a flop and flop the nut, and I slow played it. No point in raising here. This king is a good card for me. I like that he keeps on betting it. And this queen is again a good card for me. I check, hoping he continue betting his king, but he makes a bigger than usual bet here, which again leads me to think that he may have a 2-pair plus hand. So again I decided to go for max value, and my read was correct because he had queen 8 for 2-pair. Okay, let's take a look at the biggest losses that I had in a close to non-spewy fashion, I'd like to think. So I have pocket kings in the middle position. I open, I get 3-bet by the cutoff. I 4-bet, and he just calls. So heavy pre-flop action here ended with me having the initiative. As an initial thought, I block ace king, and ace queen is highly unlikely given the pre-flop action. Sorry, I don't think he has many aces here. Maybe probably just aces and some high Broadway cards, high suited Broadway cards, and some pairs smaller than my kings. The flop comes ace 10 ace with 2 diamonds. I check, and he fires out. So again, review my train of thoughts from pre-flop. So I block ace king, ace queen is unlikely given the action. If he were to have 10s here or some weird ace, he would have let me do the betting given that I was the main pre-flop aggressor. I also recall him betting quite fast here, which for me is a timing tell that he doesn't really have much, and I decide to call. The turn is a brick, and I check for a bit of pot control and to maybe induce some bluffs from him, and he shoves. So again, this shove kind of falls under the same considerations. So I block lots of ace king combos. We can rule out ace queen here. Any nutted hand would have checked on the flop. So my final thought here, and summing up actually, was that he didn't have any ace, and that I have a strong chance of winning this hand, and I decide to make the call. The turn completes the diamond draw, and he shows down the jack 9 of diamonds for a flush, which is too bad, but turns out my read was correct. Okay, let's see, ace king offsuit in the big blind, in the button, sorry. I 3-bet an under the gun opener, and he just calls. So pre-flop he has a capped range unless it's a weird slow play. I think the top of his range is pocket queens here. Not the best flop for my hand. I still have the ace of spades. He checks and I fire a bet, a smallish bet, and he decides to re-raise me here. So some of you may advocate calling here, but I thought that if I were to call here, on the turn the stack to pot ratio, the effective stack to pot ratio would have been close to 1-to-1, and if I missed the turn, I would have had a hard time folding. I would have folded, but I would have lost this call as well. Also, given how this hand was played, okay, he can have 7s, 8s, or 9s, but I also counted my ace at least as an out and my king as an out. So I had the 9 outs for the spades and another 6 outs for the pairs in case he has something like an overpair to the board. In case he has a more nutted hand like a flopped flush or like a flopped straight or like a flopped set, I still have outs. And given the fact that I have some added folding equity to my hand, I decided to shove and put him to the test. And he calls me. Unfortunately, I miss my flush and he shows down 8-9 for a flopped 2 pair. Okay, pocket deuces and the button. I call here to set mine. Four-handed, I flop a set. I actually remember this hand. It's just a cooler, but I have a good consideration to make. So this guy opens, I call, and this guy re-raises. This guy calls as well, which has me quite worried. I don't know if shoving here, I mean if I were to shove here, I think I would have get called only by better sets. Given if it were just me and this guy, yeah, I would have shoved and maybe he would have called with an open-ended straight draw or with an overpair. But given that there is also this guy after me that called, I think in retrospect my shove here was bad. I should have just called and see the turn. The outcome of this hand would have been the same, but just as a consideration, this shove was bad here. I should have just called. Nothing really threatens my hand besides Jack 10, essentially, and some random pair flopping a set. Basically, my hand was close to turn into a bluff here. Yeah, I may get called by some overpair, but he may find some folds. So the conclusion is, yeah, I should have just called this and see the turn. But I shove, and I get 2 callers. And this hand is quite painful because I was against 2 bigger flopped sets on the flop, and these were the big losses, guys. Okay guys, let's see some spews. I won't be making a ton of commentary on these hands because words are useless here. I just like to show you some of the spewy highlights of this challenge. So defending, king jack, check check, call the jack, and here I wanted to bluff and make a weak ace fold, and I shove, and I get called by ace jack. Next hand, king jack again. Okay, I open, call a re-raise, flop top pair, I check to induce, I check to induce, and I finally value bet the river and my opponent shoves. I remember this hand because my only thought process here was based on the fact that I saw this guy playing the same few hands ago, just shoving the river on a pointless board with a small pot. We are both quite deep here. I mean, actually this is 69L, yeah, we are both quite deep here. And I make the hero call, and he had kings. Next one. Okay, ace king here. 3-bet from the big blind. I get called by this guy. I flop a backdoor flush draw and a backdoor straight draw. I bet he calls. I turn the nut flush draw and I decide to overbet shove, trying to semi-bluff my hand, make him fold some weak holdings, but he ended up calling me down with a straight flush. Having fun. And this is the worst hand from the whole challenge. I can't even look at this hand. Don't know what was going through my mind. I decided to 3-bet deuces, call a 4-bet with deuces. This is the worst flop for deuces. I mean, yeah, it's worst flop for his range as well. If he were to have like a big chunk of his range made by overcards, but he was a 10-5 player on a smallish sample size of 60 hands. So I decided to check, and the raise representing the god awful nuts here, and he snap calls me with probably everyone knew he had aces, but I had to show this part as well. So I had a lot of fun playing these hands, but reviewing these Spewy hands kind of hurts a bit. Let's move on. Okay, let's dive into the pots that I took down without getting to showdown. First of all, ace queen, I re-raise from the button and I get a caller from the cutoff. So pre-flop, calling out of position, I instantly give him a capped range, medium pairs, maybe broadways, and we go to the flop. I flop a gut shot, he checks, I bet, and he calls. His range kind of remains the same, probably I can rule out the small pocket pairs. It turns a jack, and this is where the hand gets interesting because he donks on the double flush draw board given that I showed strong initiative. At this moment I ask myself, would he do this with a jack? Probably not, because I showed initiative pre-flop and on the flop. So if he were to turn a jack here, it would have been easy for him to just check, set the trap, I would have bet, and he probably would have re-raised me to get to the pot. So I tell myself that there are small chances for him to have the jack here, and I decide to put him to the test and make a small re-raise just to leave me enough room to fold in case he shoves. And he only calls. Again, this is interesting because if he were to have a jack or any strong made hands here, this would be the perfect opportunity for him to just go all in. I said on pre-flop that I have a hand, I said on the flop that I have a big hand, I continue my story, so he would have just gotten his money in here with the shove. Added the fact that the board is heavy drawy, so I rule off the jack here. And the river comes a 9 of clubs, so it's really bad for me because it completes the open-ended straight draw, which I kind of block actually, but it also completes the backdoor flush draw, which I don't block at all. So this is where the hand gets interesting, guys, because if you were to check here, if he were to check, I would have given up. If he shoved, I would have folded. Instead, with the stack to pot ratio of 1-to-1, he donks half pot after I showed aggression on all previous streets. Now again, the same thought process that I had on the turn. If he would have easily shoved here with Jack X, Queen 10, so I went with my gut and figured that he most likely has a weak king or even a missed flush draw, and we shoved and gave him insane pot odds to call here, and he laid his hand down. The next hand is the ace queen of diamonds from the button. I 3-bet, get a 4-bet from the small blind, which is a fairly aggressive player. Yeah, small sample size, but I will take this into consideration a bit as well. I have position, I have a suited ace queen, I decide to call the 4-bet. Now pre-flop my range here is capped, and he, while being uncapped, still has a large 3-bet percentage and 0 fold to steal, so his range is more polarized than just one based on strong hands. I also block ace king, aces, and queen queen. Now the low flop comes. It's bad for both ranges, but I think it kind of suits mine a bit more. So I decide to float his half pot bet, given that we are super deep. Now the turn pairs the board, and he fires half pot again. And now I was thinking, I recall this hand, so I was thinking, wouldn't aces, kings, or queens check at least once? Well, probably yeah, given that we are both deep. And on what better card to do it than when a brick pairs the board? Instead, I decided to play my hand here as a standard overplay. Queen queen most likely, since I block one queen, so it's fairly unlikely for him to have another queen. And I float him again, making the pot big. But again, given that he bet here on this brick and he continued to fire, yeah, you may say that this float was a bit spewy, but I think that a guy with these stats would have been a bit more tricky. He wouldn't just fire here just blindly like this. And the river brings the overpaired dream and nightmare at the same time. So the effective stack is 20, moving the stack to pot ratio mild under the 1-to-1 ratio. And basically here what's interesting is that he waves the red flag. The white flag, sorry, the red flag is bad. Actually, yeah, he waved the red flag because I came charging here. So I said to myself, well, Johnny, la gente está muy loca, sorry. I said to myself that if I call the flop, I call the turn, and he has aces or kings, he would have been more than happy to make me pay the rest and not risk me checking back something like tens, which I would have done. So I decided that ace king maybe is the top of his range here, as well as some small overpairs to the board which have a small chance of calling here. Also quads cross my mind a bit, but not likely given the pre-flop action, and then there are only 3 combos left of that 4 with an ace. And I block the suited one, the ace-4 of diamonds, so I rule that out. So bottom line, he either has a weak small pair, bluffs that gave up, ace-king, so it was doubtful that I can win the hand just by checking, so I just put him all in, and remember that he insta-folded. And this turned out to be a very, very nice spot for me to win. Okay, so ace-5 in the button. I make a standard 3-bet and my opponent calls. The stacks are super deep. My opponent seems a decent player here, probably a bit too passive. His range is capped and mine is not. Moving on to the flop. This is a bad flop for my hand, but a decent one for my perceived range though. He may also have things like queen jack, king queen, ace queen, not too concerned about that since I block some combos, small pairs, and of course whips. I just make a bet to find out where I am in the hand, and he calls. I think that strong hands would have played aggressively on this flop. So given that he is out of position and may lose value on later streets, I think that if he were to have something like a set or 2 pair, he would have re-raised me on the flop, so I kind of downgrade his holdings right now. The turn bricks and he checks again, and I bet bigger, wanting to get rid of holdings such as ace-10, 5s, 6s, 8s, 9s, and so on. Again, we are deep, and if he had 2 pair or better, he would have just dropped the hammer here, no questions asked. Instead, he only calls. This call seems particularly weak, and right now his range is heavily weighted towards draws and weak jacks or queens. The river brings the Perfect brick. Ruled out. I previously ruled out sets that may upgrade to a full house. So the effective stack now is over 200 big blinds, and he checks. I figured that an overbet here may only get a crying call in the worst case from an ace-queen, which consists of only 9 combos here. The pot is close to a buy-in at 25 NL. Yeah, I was playing 25 NL, so the pot is close to a buy-in. And there are at least twice as many combos, sorry, that he will fold, given that I do not block the flush draw and I do not block the open-ended straight draw. So I go for the overbet here and take down a nice pot. This is a graph of the close to 10k hands that I played. I had a lot of fun playing these hands. Can't say I ran good, I didn't run bad either, so the profit target was well outpassed and the challenge is officially complete. Thank you all for watching. If you have any ideas about other challenges, post them in comments. Thank you for the support and see you at the tables. Cheers guys.